What's happening, good people? Welcome to the channel. I'm Wes, aka Mr. Budget Watch, and well, we have an exciting video for you today. Instead of doing a traditional review about this watch that already has loads of them, why not break the mold and do something a little bit different? That's why I'm launching this new series called Big Watch, Small Wrist. And from that you can kind of guess where this is heading. So in this series I'll be showing you watches that would likely be a turn off for us folks with slim wrists, and hopefully proving that not all big watches are the same, and some in fact may surprise you. So to launch this series I'll begin with the Casio Duro, one of the most popular affordable dive watches made today. The Duro has been on my watch list for a long time, and I have put it off countless times due to it being on the larger side. But when Amazon had it on sale I thought, do you know what? The only truly way I'm going to know if it's too big is by actually physically buying one and trying it for myself. And that is what I did. So now let us dive in and start off with a breakdown of the sizes of this watch. And we'll do that a little bit different than usual. And I'm actually going to be showing you a very basic and rudimentary engineer's drawing. So for any engineers out there, I am really sorry. This is just a really rough, rudimentary my take on it. Anyway, so basically this shows you all the relevant dimensions that are important to play a role in how a watch wears. So starting with the two most important, and that is the diameter and lug to lug. So the diameter is measured across 2 points across the width of the case, usually. For the Duro it's actually 44mm. The lug to lug, arguably even more important than the diameter, is typically the longest point of this style of watch, which is the tip of the lug to the tip of the lug, and here it is 48.9. Then we have the diameter with the crown coming in at 47.5, the lug width at 22, and a thickness of 12.2. But numbers only paint part of the picture, as the KShape does play a role in this too. And we all know, there's plenty of K-shapes out there, some wearing smaller and some wearing larger. Now in the case of the Duro, it's perceivably round, though it's not actually a perfect circle, because the dimensions differ from point to point, as you can see right here. Another factor that impacts wearability is the movement. Yes, that is true. For example, an automatic is typically, not in all cases, thicker than a quartz. This is to do with the movement structure and of course how it's all put together, and then the added thickness that the rotor does put on top of that. Whereas a quartz does not need any of that and thus can be made a lot thinner. Then there are mechanical watches which, in a basic sense, is basically like a modified version of an automatic without a rotor, thus making them thinner than an automatic, but not in all cases. Back to the Duro, and this is, well, a quartz, making it 12.2mm thick, like we've covered already, which, to be honest, is quite respectable for a diver with a rating of 200 meters water resistance. Again though, there is more to the story. The next area that can impact how a watch wears is the caseback style. And of course there are a few. There's screw in, pop off, screw down, and also exhibition, which can be a blend of, well, two different types. You can either have a screw in or a screw down exhibition style. And that is essentially a caseback with a small circle cut out so you can actually see the movement inside. But how does this affect comfort? Well, they are all different in terms of how thick they actually are. A screw in and pop off are kind of common on dress watches and digitals, as they are simple and, as well, they don't need to be submerged in water like a diver would, thus they don't need to be as thick or as robust. Though, in some cases a G-Shock does have a screw in case back, but that is a different video entirely. Well, then there is obviously the screw down type, which of course, like I've mentioned, is a thicker metal and is more resilient, and you can also find these a lot on watches with higher depth ratings. Not always, but that is usually the case. Finally, the see-through exhibition style are often the thickest, as they have to make way for a disc of either mineral or sapphire to allow you to view the movement. Again, not always, but usually they are a little bit thicker. But, well, how does this impact anything? Well, actually, it all ties back in to how thick the watch is. So the Caseback can actually make the watch thicker or thinner depending on the style. So a screw in or pop off will be quite thin, usually, whereas a screw down or exhibition will be thicker, thus increasing or decreasing the thickness of the watch. So usually, not always, the thinner the watch, the better it wears. Usually, but not always. See, this is kind of more complicated than what you'd think. Now, we have to factor in another thing, the side profile. Like Casebacks, there are a few different types of this. There is a flat, which is essentially quite linear. Then there is a flat midsection with downturned lugs. Then there's also curved cases, and curved cases with downturned lugs too. So there is, quite a few, and there's probably more that I've missed off as well. Again, this can have a knock-on effect on how a watch wears. So take the Duro for example. You can see that the middle of the case is quite flat, and then the lugs take a sloping downwards turn towards your wrist. This does make the quite long 48.9 lug to lug length more palatable, as the long, it doesn't stick out straight, but again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Finally, to the strap, and this again does have quite an impact on how a watch wears. And honestly, there's too many to cover in one video, so we're just going to be speaking about two popular ones. And speaking of, today's actually opts for a resin strap, which is quite good at making a watch wear a little bit smaller than, say, perhaps a bracelet would. Now, this is due in part to the thinner material being used, and of course, more flexibility, which means it can conform and flow better with the shape and contour of your wrist. Taper is also another factor that can make a larger watch look smaller, as a strap with no taper looks quite large, whereas a taper deceives the eye and makes it watch appear a little bit smaller than it actually is. Finally, there's no male end links or end links to worry about at all, the former of which can increase the length of the lug to lug, making smaller watches wear bigger than they are, but again, that is not a problem here, and for a different video. So now we've covered all the areas, let's get this on wrist and show you how all of this translates to the wearing experience. Now I have a 6-inch wrist for reference, and here you can see, although the diameter is way larger than I would usually wear, it doesn't appear to be too overwhelming. Now at a large 44mm, this would be unheard of fitting a 6-inch wrist, but I think it's not overbearing, and that is thanks to a few different attributes. The thickness, the profile, and of course the aesthetics, which is the last thing. Now because this watch has a bezel, it actually reduces the impact of the dial, making it seem smaller. Again, this is a trick of perspective. For example, if I was to wear a pilot's watch with this same diameter, this effect would be different, as the slimmer bezel makes the dial appear larger, thus making the watch look larger on your wrist. You'll also spot a little trick that I'm adopting as well, and that is to cover part of my wrist with a long sleeve. Again, this trick sort of deceives the eye and hides essentially the true thinness of my wrist, making this large watch look a little bit more suited. You can see this effect in reverse if I actually roll up my sleeve. You can spot this sort of difference this little trick makes by actually seeing how thick my wrist actually is, making the watch appear larger. Because the sleeve covers up the thinness, it actually again tricks your eye into making people, perceive your wrist as thicker than it is, making the watch seem smaller. It's very strange and quite complicated, but it does actually work. You'll also know, looking at the side profile, the slope lugs make it hug my wrist better and appeal a little smaller. Again, it's all in that perspective. So in summary, if you have a slim wrist like myself, don't let pure numbers put you off, or there are plenty of other factors to take into account when finding a watch that fits. Now, one piece of advice I will like to give you, and if this is the only thing you take away from the video, then I'm happy. If you can, always try a watch on beforehand. This way you will know exactly if that watch is going to fit you or not, because like mentioned, paper specs don't always paint a full picture. Thanks for watching the video. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, like the video if you enjoyed it, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any uploads, and of course follow me on social media at Mr. Budget Watch. Thanks again, I'll see you soon.